And we're back. Greetings, everyone. This is Lucian Vâlsan, broadcasting from Cluj-Napoca, Transylvania. As always, alongside with me is Herr Jon Gunnarsson, broadcasting from Deutschland, and our producer James Huff, making sure everything works just fine, broadcasting from the States. Greetings, Jon.
Good evening. How are you doing?
I'm doing fine. I just moved into a new location, and thank God for capitalism. The fiber optics just followed me. I just called them and said, "Look, I'm moving into a new location," and they're like, "Are you there tonight? Because there is no fiber optics at that building, but we're gonna put it if you move there." Uh, thank
Nice.
goodness. Yeah, thank God for capitalism. So basically, when I arrived here, the internet was crap, only 50 megabits per second, and then the company came in and put in the fiber optics, now 300, winning. So yeah, very nice. And more importantly, now I'll be able to do podcasts even during the night. I'll be able to do a lot of things that were impossible to do um, at the previous location. Other than that, I'm boiling. It's hot as hell.
Yeah, same here in mine. Probably not quite as hot as on your end, but it's still far too hot.
And during the day, it went as high as 41 in Celsius. Uh, and now it's something like 32, 33. Still quite hot, unreasonably hot. I expect the air to be breathable maybe 3 hours from now. That will be midnight local time. And it will only last for like 4 hours or 5 hours until the sun comes up again. Thank goodness we're not in Sweden, because the last thing we would need is, is a 23-hour long day with these temperatures.
But then again, you don't get this kind of temperatures in Sweden, so
Except 2014, when the Germans were going to were going to the beach in Sweden. But except 2014, yeah, you don't get that hot in Sweden. At least not in the eastern part where the capital city is. In the western part, sometimes maybe not 42, but 35 for sure. But then again, that's the portion where even in the winter it's like +3, +4. It rarely goes to the freezing level. It's thanks to the warm currents that come from the ocean.
yep.
Right, we have a quite a lengthy news section, although slightly shorter than what we had 2 weeks ago. But then again, it's again supposed to cover 2 weeks, so there's that. All right, so let's kick in the German efficiency into gear, and let's jump in. Go ahead.
Okay, from the Daily Mail from the UK, abuse victim who was handed 175,000 compensation is ordered to give his ex-wife 100,000 pounds of it as part of his divorce settlement. A judge has ordered a father to give his estranged wife 100,000 pounds from the compensation he received for suffering sexual abuse as a child. Andrew Kerslake, 47, was given 175,000 pounds by the government, but regarded the cash as dirty money and put it into a trust to be given to a charity when he dies. But as part of a divorce settlement, his ex-wife Helen Tippett, 42, applied to a court in Wales to demand a share of the fund, claiming it was a marital asset. After a hearing held in private, Judge Stuart Badcup ruled in Mrs. Tippett's favor. Mr. Kerslake was given until tomorrow to pay a lump sum of £100,000 or risk going to jail for contempt of court. The case can be reported after a legal battle by the Daily Mail, which was banned from the hearing despite new rules allowing accredited journalists into all levels of family courts. Mr. Kerslake said yesterday, "I will fight it all the way and go to jail if necessary. Helen and her new man will spend it how they like. It's shameful that she has even asked for the money. How can she get pleasure out of my pain and suffering? It doesn't seem right. She wasn't the one who was abused. I will do everything I can to defend the trust for the future." He added, "The money was paid to me for what happened long before I met my wife. There's a principle here. I can't understand how the courts can award me my compensation to my ex-wife. It doesn't make sense." Mr. Kerslake, who was molested between the ages of 5 and 10 by a family friend. After he finally went to the police in 1998, his abuser was jailed for 3 years.
Oh boy.
Yeah, so we covered this case a while ago when this was still something that like it was this sort of
Was
crazy thing
could
that
be.
might possibly happen, but now it's actually happened. Now it's actually been ordered to pay that money.
Yeah. Uh,
Uh,
horrible, horrible. What's really interesting is that the Daily Mail didn't quit. They went into the legal battle and said, no, there is these rules that allows the press to go to all levels of the family courts. You will gonna let us cover it. You will gonna let us look into the court documents. Uh, I didn't expect that level of relentlessness from the Daily Mail, and it's a good thing. To
it's almost like their newspaper.
almost like their newspaper. Yeah, this is why I award a default 10% trust to the Daily Mail, because when it comes to these things, they really don't give up. Uh, and it's not something that can be said about many publications, not just in Britain but in Europe in general. Most of the newspapers today, they no longer, either they can't afford it, they don't have the finances to do it, or they simply just don't bother with never giving up on a story, especially on a story that is not, headline grabbing and whatnot. It's not like, it's a corruption scandal of Theresa May or something like that. It's something a little bit lower than that.
Yeah, minimum journalism level of 10% achieved.
Yeah, yeah. So that's a good thing, and we're already seeing the consequences of those rules, which we covered when they were first instated in 2014, I think, or 15. When finally the family courts in Britain, one of the last family courts probably in the world to be secretive, were finally forced to start opening up to the public slowly but surely. And we predicted at that time that once they'll start being implemented, we're going to see a lot of nastiness that we couldn't even believe it was possible. Because until 2015, many of the people were subjected to various gag orders and things like that. So we would only hear the cases where those involved had left the country and were able to speak freely about it and beyond the reach of the long arm of the British law.
Yeah, I mean, who knows how many egregious cases like that happened over the last couple of decades, and we never heard about it.
Yeah, it could be one or two, or it could be in the tens of thousands. It's just really no way to know. As for the merits of the case, ridiculous, ridiculous, and um, I don't know what kind of a monster of a human being you have to be to say, "Oh, my partner was sexually molested. I should get a share of the compensation." What kind of a person does that? And
Yeah.
what kind of a judge thinks that's reasonable? I mean, as far as I'm concerned, the helicopters for both of them. I mean, come on, amazing, amazing. It's funny that the judge's name Stuart Butcup ruled in Mrs. Tippett's favor. I mean, the memes just write themselves. At one point, yeah, I've seen some comments about, oh, but this guy, Mr. Kerslake, has children. So why does he keep the fund in a trust instead of supporting his children and whatnot? And I'm like, uh, who says he doesn't? There's just no evidence that he doesn't. I mean, it's not like it's the last 175,000 pounds in the world. I mean, it's entirely possible that he has other money to support his children as well. That's one aspect, and the second aspect is, again, it's compensation for what he suffered. And as far as and the article goes into great detail, but I've cut the rest of it because, yeah, time constraints. But as he basically says, no, look, I'm gonna want to support charities that help people that have gone through what I've gone through, uh, which I think it's sensible in the end. And again, it should be his right to dispose of that compensation however he deems fit.
Yeah, I mean, he said is that he views the thing as dirty money that he doesn't really want to have, but he wants it to go to this charity, and so that should be his decision. And I mean,
Yeah.
it's not a marital asset; it's money he had before going to the marriage.
Yeah, well, he actually was awarded the compensation when he was married, but as he says, it's a matter of principle here. He was entitled to it the second he was abused, which was
Yeah,
long before he was married. So, it's like I buy shares to Coca-Cola now, and I get married, let's say 5 years from now, and then 15 years from now, those shares are suddenly worth I don't know, €1 million. That's not a marital asset because I invested. I was entitled to the results of those shares long before I was married. It's pretty much the same thing, except with the much more egregious thing. I mean, this guy was assaulted several hundreds of times. Every week it was something like Monday, Wednesday, Thursday, and Saturday, or something like that. The article goes into very, very gruesome details. And to have these, because I'm putting a lot of moral blame on the wife here. I mean, just to have the audacity to claim that you should be entitled to some of that is just reprehensible.
Yep.
All right. Staying in the United Kingdom, coming from the very fake news network, UK regulator, ads can't depict dads as cavemen. Advertisements that depict men as unable to wash the dishes and women as expert domestic cleaners will be banned in Britain. The country's advertising watchdog announced plans on Tuesday to ban ads that reinforce harmful gender stereotypes, saying that tougher standards will help reduce inequality. The Independent Advertising Standards Authority said it hopes to have the new rules in place next year. Quote, portrayals which reinforce outdated and stereotypical views of gender roles in society can play their part in driving unfair outcomes for people, said Guy Parker, the organization's chief executive. The regulator had previously banned advertisements that objectify or sexualize people, as well as those that show unhealthy, thin young women. It said that tougher standards are now needed to address stereotypes that can restrict the choices, aspirations, and opportunities for children, young people, and adults. What exactly might be off limits? The group gave the example of a 2016 Gap ad that described a young boy as a little scholar whilst labeling a girl as the social butterfly. It also cited a television spot for Aptamil baby milk powder that portrayed girls growing up to become ballerinas and boys as future engineers and rock climbers. The ASA said it had received complaints about both advertisements. Aptamil, which is manufactured by Danone, said it strongly believes in diversity and equal opportunities and always wants to behave responsibly. We'll take the ASA's findings into account as we develop our advertising to show more diversity in roles and aspirations, said spokeswoman Helen Messenger. GAP did not immediately respond to a request for comment. The ASA said other problematic ads could include an ad that shows family members creating a mess and the woman who has the sole responsibility for cleaning it up, suggesting a specific activity is inappropriate for boys because it is stereotypically associated with girls or vice versa, an ad that features a man trying and failing at simple parental or household tasks, and so on. Sam Smithers, who campaigns for women's rights as CEO of the Fawcett Society, said that ads of this nature are well past their sell-by date. Gender stereotypes lie behind the inequalities women face in our society, from the gender pay gap to violence against women and girls, she said, helicopters idle in distance. Um, so, um, first of all, since when is the Fawcett Society an expert in advertising? Uh, to come in and say, oh, these ads are well past their sell-by date. That's not for you to decide, honey.
Yeah, I mean, it just there's just like no evidence behind any of it. This gender stereotypes lie behind the inequalities women face in our society, from the gender pay gap to violence against women and girls. She asserted without any evidence.
Yeah. Not to mention, there is no really gender pay gap the way I understand it, and the level of violence against women and girls is 4 to 15 times smaller than the level of violence against men and boys, literally anywhere in the world.
Maybe with that last statement, she might be sort of like technically correct that gender stereotypes play some role in making it so that women and girls experience less violence than men.
Yeah,
that might be
that might be true.
Might be true, but I don't think that's what she means.
For sure. I mean, this is one of those cases that we were having in mind when we made our show about egalitarianism. Just because something is equal, it doesn't make it necessarily unretarded. Sure, the recommendations are equal, but are they useful?
Yeah, I mean, equal insanity does not sanity make.
Precisely, precisely. I, I, I mean, I can understand why some individuals may not like, I don't know, an ad that features a man trying and failing at simple parental or household tasks. I don't like those kinds of ads, but I don't want them banned, especially not using the, let's face it, the violence of the law, because the advertising state standards agency, yeah, it's independent to the extent that the Ministry of Internal Affairs is independent. I mean, it really is a state monopoly at the end of the day. Uh, it's one of those bureaucratic tricks that politicians have played in many countries, not just in Britain. Many countries have these kinds of organizations that allegedly are independent, but in fact are anything but. So again, I can understand why some people might not like some of these ads that are described in this particular uh, ruling or whatever policy paper. Uh, but why should the state be involved in banning them?
Yeah. Also, like these rules seem really draconian. So, for example, one example they bring up is that an ad which portrays a girl as the social butterfly and a boy as a little scholar is unacceptable.
Yeah, why is that?
So, I
Could
mean,
it be possible that that maybe need to be true in those individuals' cases?
this ad presumably does not state that all girls are like that or all boys are like that, but just like this particular boy and this particular girl.
Mhm.
Uh, what is wrong with that? I mean, should we
Yeah,
just assume that all ads are to be representative of all the various demographics that are shown? Like, if you show that, I don't know, a man who is a doctor, should we then assume that, all men are doctors or something like that? Or,
and
like,
what
that's
are you
absurd,
going?
obviously.
Yeah, and what are you going to do when you have an ad for dildos? I mean, are we supposed to have ads that, I don't know, put straight men as regular buyers and users of dildos? Uh, why? So we don't stereotype homosexuals or women? I mean, really? Because this is pretty much it. I mean, this is predicated on this assumption that ads are somehow documentaries or I don't know, fiats by the council of the wise men of the village. I mean, something that they should be regarded as an indication for the whole society rather than just an ad for a product.
Yeah, I mean, should we then also have say ads depicting men buying and using tampons, for example,
Yeah.
or I mean, there's just a certain products that's obviously tailored to a particular demographic. Then portraying that demographic using that product should obviously be okay. But I mean, even like there's no particular example of outlawing that, but based on the kinds of examples that they present here, that would already be sort of in a gray area.
Hmm. Hmm.
I mean,
Yeah. And
basically, if the people you show in your ad are behaving in any way stereotypical, then it's already basically not okay.
problematic. It's
And
problematic.
the problem with that is that most stereotypes are there for a reason because
Yeah.
they are actually accurate in that they portray what is typical of a particular group.
Mhm, mhm. Yeah, I mean, for instance, there is the one with the saying that, hold on, where it is, with boys who climb up things or whatnot. Yeah, those things are pretty much not necessarily typical, but it is a lot more likely that a man will be an alpinist than a woman. That doesn't mean that there are no such thing as female alpinists. It's just a lot fewer of them. And there's nothing wrong with that. I mean, such variation is natural and normal.
Yeah, and I mean,
Same goes. Oh yeah, here it is. The Aptamil baby milk powder. Girls growing up to become ballerinas and boys as future engineers and rock climbers. Uh, yeah, what's wrong with that? There are very few boys who, at the age of 4, dream of becoming, ballerinas. It's just that it doesn't work like that. However, finding 4-year-old or 3-year-old boys thinking that they might build stuff or climb up very tall stuff and being fascinating by machinery and whatnot, that's pretty typical. What's so wrong about that?
Yeah, it's just a sort of generalized attitude that all stereotypes are harmful and all gender roles are harmful,
Mhm.
when there isn't any evidence for that. I mean, there's evidence that the gender roles sort of influence our behavior in various ways, but it doesn't necessarily mean that this influence is harmful. I mean, in some ways it's helpful, in other ways it's harmful.
Mhm.
Um, but this idea that um, that you have to completely avoid any reference to gender norms or gender roles has no scientific support. It's
Yep.
just an ideological proposition that is currently popular.
Yep. Yep. And since stereotypes are the fault for gender pay gaps, let's talk about the very, very oppressed women who work for the BBC. Coming from the Evening Standard, BBC caught in gender pay gap storm as salaries of stars earning more than £150,000 are revealed. The BBC was engulfed in a huge gender pay gap storm today after it emerged that top paid male star ranked in more than 4 times the salary of the highest earning woman. Chris Evans was paid between £2.2 million and 2.250 million pounds during the 2016-2017 for his work for the corporation, which included Top Gear and Radio 2. The bumper sum far exceeded the £450,000 to £499,999 for Claudia Winkleman of Strictly Come Dancing, who also works on radio. 6 other men also received pay above Winkleman's. They included Match of the Day presenter Gary Lineker and the chat show host and radio presenter Graham Norton. Today, BBC Director General Tony Hall said it needed to go further and faster on issues of gender and diversity. Our very old friend, Labour MP Jess Phillips, who sat on the Women and Equalities Committee, said, quote, "There is clearly a fundamental problem in how women are valued by the corporation. It's difficult to see how this wasn't picked up sooner." Some of the BBC's highest earning BAME talent, now BAME is politically correct speech for non-white people, are among the casts of primetime shows, including Casualty and EastEnders, but even here, white men top the charts for high earners. On-screen sisters Tamika Empson and Diane Parrish earn between £150,000 and £199,999 for their roles in EastEnders, while Holby City's Hugh Quarshie is in the same pay band. But EastEnders' highest earners are Danny Dyer, who plays Queen Vic landlord Mick Carter, and the ever-present Adam Woodyard. Both earned between £200,000 and £250,000. The BBC annual report and accounts for 2016-17 also showed the overall wage and salary bill at the corporation rising above £1 billion, which with a black hole in its pension scheme of similar size. The BBC has been forced by the government to publish the salaries of all its top talent paid at least £150,000, which is as much as the Prime Minister. Overall, two-thirds of the 96 top earners were men, sparking a gender pay gap row. Men working on the same program as women also were often paid more. Among the Strictly judges, Darcy Bussell was on between £150,000 and £200,000, while Len Goodman received between £200,000 and £250,000, as did Bruno Tonioli. Anyway, it lists a lot more stars that no one cares about. Lord Hall pledged to close the gender salary divide by 2020 and emphasized that it was about 10% compared with the reported nationwide figure at 18%. He said, quote, "We want all our lead and presenting roles to be equally divided by men and women. I want to achieve right balance when it comes to BAME talent too, that is non-white people. Here we have a similarly tough target, 15% by 2020. And again, that's having an impact with nearly 20% of the leading talent we've hired or promoted in the last few years from BAME backgrounds." He added, "Comparing people's pay is not straightforward. Very few do precisely the same thing. People working at the same show may have other or different commitments. Of the top talent who are on the list, who we have hired or promoted in the last 3 years, more than 60% are women." Damian Collins, chairman of the Commons Culture, Media and Sport Committee, said, "Many license fee payers will be concerned about the disparity between the number of high earners that are men as opposed to the number of senior women that earn over 150,000. Lord Hall, who earns from 450,000 to 500,000 pounds, fears that being forced to publish the list to salary could lead to salary inflation and talent being poached. So basically, BBC is afraid of capitalism and competition.
Yeah, but I mean, a private corporation would also not want to have the salaries of all their employees published for pretty much the same reason.
Yeah, but the private broadcasters don't force anyone to pay for them. Because at the end of the day, the BBC is pretty much like, I don't know, the Ministry of Internal Affairs, or sorry, the Home Office Secretary, as it's called in Britain. It's a public institution. Everyone is forced to pay for them. So it stands to reason that the taxpayers should know what happens with their shekels, shouldn't it be true?
Yeah, I mean, to me, it stands to reason that the BBC shouldn't exist, but that's another page.
True.
Well, I mean, at least it shouldn't exist in its present form, funded by taxpayers. I mean, if BBC is turned into a private corporation and people, it's funded by ads or subscriptions or whatever, then I'm completely fine with it. But I don't think that British people should be forced to pay for these programs if they don't want to watch them.
Yeah. Yeah, this whole thing, and this is strictly a European thing, with having a public broadcaster that not only exists, but it should be overly financed to be so important, preferably the highest player in the media market. This whole thing is so. Even if you look it through their perspective, it's still passé. I mean, maybe you can argue I don't agree with that argument, but one can argue that maybe they had a role in the 50s when it was expensive to open or in the 60s when it was expensive to open a TV station. But from the 70s onwards, and especially from the 90s onwards, I don't understand why these kinds of corporations still exist. The BBC, the SVT in Sweden, the RAI in Italy, all of these, the ARD in Germany. Why do they still exist?
I mean, with the argument about 50s and 60s about it being so expensive, well, if it was too expensive to open them back then we shouldn't have had television.
Yeah, true. As I said, I don't agree with that particular argument. But even from that perspective, it still doesn't make sense for these institutions to still exist today.
I mean, basically, the argument for that is that they offer sort of high quality content, and because they're not beholden to like any sort of private corporations, they can be more independent and unbiased. Though, of course, that's not really the case. I mean,
history has already proved to us that that's simply not the case. As for the core of the story, the gender pay gap, yeah, it kind of makes sense. I mean, I've cut very liberally from this article because it just goes with every single star and whatnot from the BBC, and I have no idea who half of these people are. But for instance, here it compares tennis legend John McEnroe, a presenter and commentator at the BBC's Wimbledon team, was paid between 150,000 and 200,000 pounds, but Martina Navratilova did not make the list. Well, who the hell is Martina Navratilova? I mean, I understand this guy is a tennis legend, so obviously he has a lot more expertise than Mrs. Nobody that didn't even make the list. It just makes the argument for just listing the names and the titles of these people just makes the argument for itself. It's not about the sex of these people. It's about that one of them has a much higher gravitas and a much higher level of credibility and whatnot, and the other doesn't. And as a result, that reflects in their pay. Ironically, the BBC just proved that it's run as capitalistic as possible for a public corporation.
Yeah, I mean, as for whether these various personalities deserve the kind of salaries that they get, I have no idea. Maybe they overpaid. Who knows? Basically, now sort of the market tests will show whether they have been overpaid, if indeed lots of poaching happens, or if the BBC is forced to raise lots of the salaries in order to prevent poaching, then that sort of shows that they haven't been overpaid. But if no sort of poaching happens, then that points towards a lot of these stars being overpaid. As what happens, we'll have to wait and see. But just from the fact that most of the top paid people are men does not at all imply that there's some sort of discrimination. Because I mean, if you look at basically almost any competitive field, you will find that almost all of the top people will be men.
Yeah,
That doesn't matter if it's in sort of sport, if it's any sort of other kind of competition, if it's in business, in science, in like almost any field you can pick, you find this pattern that the top ranks are dominated by men. Even in disciplines where at the lower levels, men are not better than women, or even worse than women, like say, for example, cooking, for example.
Yeah.
I'm pretty sure that the average woman is better at cooking than the average man, but still, if you look at the top chefs in the world, almost all of them are men.
Yeah, in the top 2,000 best chefs, up until like 5 years ago, there was one woman, and now there's 0 because that lady retired. so yeah, and it shouldn't be a surprise that in the end. I mean, it's that thing, there are more male idiots than female idiots, but also more male geniuses than female geniuses.
Yeah, I mean, in terms of the entertainment business, it's a bit of an unusual industry in that it's a lot less skewed at the top, mainly because just you naturally want to have women there just for the sake of having women, because you also want to have female presenters for the looks, obviously, partly, and also like if you look at actors, obviously needs people to play female roles as well. So it's just by necessity you will also find important actresses. So that's why it's as little skewed as it is. But still, if you look at acting, you still find most of the like really top high-end actors that everyone wants to see. They're still mostly men.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's not. I don't understand why people are still surprised by this, and surprised in the way that, oh, we got to fix this. I mean, there's nothing to fix because there is no problem.
And it's not because of discrimination, because you can see this in sort of competitive fields where there isn't anyone picking winners or losers, but it's just about how well can you play a particular game, how well can you do in the market, things like that. Like the fact that in chess, for example, in the top 100, there's exactly one woman. That's not because women aren't allowed to play chess or because chess judges are biased against women or anything. It's just that just aren't very many women who can play chess at a very high level.
Yeah. And in some cases, especially with chess, that there aren't that many women interested in chess to begin with. So if you have 20% of the overall people interested in the field are women, then it kind of stands to reason that there's just no way you're going to have 50% of the people excelling in that field to be women. It just doesn't work like that. So yeah. Right. Let's stick a little bit more on gender gaps because the next article pretty much makes the argument very well.
Yeah, the next article is not really very much new for us, but I think it's just a very good article, which is why I picked it. So coming from Quillette, why it's time to stop worrying about first world gender gaps. Each year, 265 million in public funding goes toward the Canada Research Chairs program, a program that funds top researchers at Canadian universities. Now, Science Minister Kirsty Duncan is threatening to defund its chairs for not meeting diversity targets. The decision came after Minister Duncan took offense at the unequal number of chairs held by women. Quote, there were 2 times more men nominated for research chair positions than women. Duncan exclaimed during an interview with the Associated Press. Government funding will be withheld until universities nominate an equal number of women. But aren't universities progressive strongholds bereft of bias and bastions of equality? Of all places, it seems unlikely that university faculties are actively holding women back. As of December 2016, only 30% of the funded chair positions were held by women. However, between 2000 and 2015, 31% of applicants for the jobs were from applications. So 31% of applicants for the jobs were women. Whatever, it's a mistake in the article here. Based on these numbers, it would be impossible to argue that sexist hiring practices are the cause of the gender imbalance in research chairs. Fewer women hold research chair positions because fewer women apply. It's that simple. So why is Duncan so upset? Minister Kirsty Duncan subscribes to a gender theory that has pervaded the intelligentsia, bureaucrats, and politicians. This theory asserts that there are no differences between men and women, that existing differences in gender representation, uneven gender ratios in research chairs, company boards, cabinet ministers, etc., are the result of a patriarchal societal system. This gender sameness theory is not interested in equal opportunity for women. It is focused on equal outcomes. To its adherents, gaps between the sexes are clear indicators of sexism and must therefore be avoided at all costs. Kirsty Duncan and Prime Minister Justin Trudeau both subscribe to this theory. They see equal representation as a requirement for an egalitarian society, even if it means assiduously ignoring differences between the sexes to achieve it. However, regardless of the popularization of gender sameness theory, the truth remains. Men and women are different, and as a result, they make different vocational choices. Using Canadian research chairs as an example, fewer women apply to research chair positions because fewer women choose to work in STEM fields. Out of all Canadians who work in STEM, only 22% are women. Furthermore, despite attempts to encourage women to work in STEM, these numbers are barely changing. Even as more women join the workforce, few choose to work in STEM fields. Between 1991 and 2011, women accounted for 75% of the growth in numbers of workers in university-level non-scientific occupations, but only 27% of the growth in the number of workers in university-level scientific occupations. Some may argue that patriarchal social factors encourage women into stereotypically feminine fields such as childcare, nursing, etc., and discourage them from pursuing STEM-related careers. However, if one were to make the case that societal factors determine choices made by men and women, you would expect that in more egalitarian countries, the sexes would make more similar career choices, and thus gender gaps would recede. However, studying sex differences across 55 different cultures, Schmidt, Realo, Wokacek, and Alec came to the opposite conclusion. Quote, with improved national wealth and equality of the sexes, it seems differences between men and women in the personality traits do not diminish. On the contrary, the differences become conspicuously larger. They also made this statement remarking on their own extensive research. In this study, a collection of 8 different gender equality indicators provided a comprehensive set of measures that assess disparity between male and female roles in society. In every case, significant findings suggest that greater nation-level gender equality leads to psychological dissimilarity in men's and women's personality traits. Gender gaps do not decrease in egalitarian countries, rather they increase. According to the authors, this is because as, quote, society becomes more prosperous and more egalitarian, innate dispositional differences between men and women have more space to develop, and the gap that exists between men and women in their personality traits becomes wider. In other words, in prosperous and egalitarian countries, people are free to pursue their respective career interests. Since men and women are innately different, they pursue different vocations based on dissimilar interests. Therefore, equal representation is an inaccurate measure of gender egalitarianism, simply because in egalitarian countries, gender gaps are the most robust. Using equal representation to measure equality between the sexes leads to false conclusions. For example, a 2015 World Economic Forum WF report ranked Rwanda as being the 6th most progressive country in the world with respect to gender. Canada ranked an abysmal 30th place, and the United States ranked 28th place. The reason Rwanda ranked so high is because the WEF only measures gaps between the sexes, e.g. wealth, life expectancy, workforce participation rates, etc. On these metrics, Rwanda performed well because of similar workforce participation rates between women and men. However, as The Guardian reported in 2014, a staggering 44.9% of the nation's people live in poverty. Furthermore, in rural areas, the poorer citizens tend to be women, often genocide survivors. In poor countries like Rwanda, women are not participating in the workforce because they are following their vocational passions or climbing the corporate ladder. They're working for survival. This didn't stop journalists from praising Rwanda for its progressiveness. Patricia Kosika reported for the Global News that Rwanda performs better than Canada and many other more developed nations when it comes to women's participation in the workforce and wage equality. Unfortunately, it's easy to draw faulty conclusions from gender gaps. Whether it's Canada's research chairs or Silicon Valley CEOs, simply identify a statistic showing unequal representation and make supercilious accusations about sexism, misogyny, and backwardness. It's time to stop worrying about gender gaps. There will never be perfect 50-50 gender parity in every field. Women will be overrepresented in some and underrepresented in others. Finding a field where women or men are underrepresented is not sufficient evidence to infer systemic sexism. In fact, robust differences in vocational choices are a sign of a prosperous and egalitarian society. Societies where, according to Schmidt et al., the innate dispositional differences between men and women have more space to develop. Recognizing innate dispositional differences is controversial in the current zeitgeist. The consensus among the intellectual and political class is that there are no real differences between the sexes, that any difference in outcome is a manifestation of sexist hiring practices or a patriarchal understanding of gender roles. To them, any country with unequal representation of women in politics, STEM graduates, with a general workforce, is a country that must shed its ancient notion of gender roles and opt for a progressive utopia of gender sameness. Like all utopian visions, this quest for gender sameness lies on faulty assumptions and infringes upon individual liberty. Because of innate differences, the sexes make dissimilar vocational choices. Government-mandated hiring practices are antithetical to individual choice. Recognizing and respecting differences is exactly what a good, tolerant society does. As Margaret Thatcher eloquently said in her 1975 speech to Conservative Party conference, "We are all unequal. No one, thank heavens, is like anyone else. We believe that everyone has a right to be unequal, but to us, every human being is equally important."
Right. Nothing more to add except to note again that global news is a fake news source. I mean, really, uh, I had no idea that this report exists, but I'll try to find it from Patricia Kozichka, uh, who praised Rwanda for performing better than Canada when it comes to I mean, I used to use this line as a joke, to poke fun at progressives and to poke fun at their gender pay gap logic. I had no idea that there is actually someone there that uses this unironically.
Yeah, I guess that Rwanda is also doing lots better on cancer rates than, for example, Canada or the United States or European countries.
For sure.
Simply because a lot of people die before they get old enough to develop cancer. And
Yep.
hey,
Yep.
isn't that great?
Yeah. The same thing is with the market segregation and whatnot. There are other studies like this. We even covered one of them, which also showed. I think it was about market segregation. I remember reading it from the Serbian media, where basically you had Rwanda and Bosnia and places that have been through genocides. They were much better ranked than, I don't know, Sweden or Hungary or Germany, on the measure of market segregation. Because, oh my God, the workplaces are much more sex segregated in Germany or in Sweden than they are in Bosnia and Rwanda. And I'm like, yeah, because half of their male population was executed very recently, so there it might have something to do with it, maybe.
Yeah, I mean, I would really, really like for an adherent of this gender sameness theory, as this author delightfully terms it, to explain to me why, in their opinion, there are more and more female engineers in India than in Sweden, in terms of
Yeah,
like percentages.
yeah, and in
Why,
Iran for that matter.
or in Iran? Why is that? Explain that to me. That doesn't make any fucking sense based on this gender sameness theory that it's all about discrimination and patriarchal oppression and so on. Or are you going to tell me that Sweden is more patriarchal than India or Pakistan or whatever?
Yeah. Also, the thing is, most of these things have been eloquently explained for normies in that documentary series by look, here's something that the state television did right. The NRK from Norway, when they they contracted that series documentary series called Brainwash Yarnevask, and the first episode is called like just like that, the gender equality paradox, the likestillings paradox. And it's a documentary made by a comedian, a guy who's hasn't been or I should say had not been ideological until that point. And he just goes in and asks questions to various people, and then goes to the gender researchers in Norway, and they make a fool out of themselves, and the guy just blinks and doesn't say anything, and then he laughs. I mean, it's like, seriously, we're paying these people to as a result of that documentary series, the entirety of the gender studies centers and whatnot, they were all defunded from the public shekels. Most of them still do exist, but they barely survive on private funding, which is fine. I mean, if there are people willing to give their own hard-earned money to that nonsense, they should be free to do so. But please don't steal from me to fund those idiots. In that particular documentary series, there was I think it was an American researcher, I forget his name now, who did this and basically compared India with Sweden, Iran with Norway, and things like that, and basically proved that, look, just because you have some outcomes that may look good for a progressive position, it doesn't necessarily mean that that place is progressive. And the reverse is also true. Just because you have numbers that look very, very bad for a progressive eye, that doesn't necessarily mean that that place is horrible and oppressive and whatnot. Um, it, Again, it's just such variation in professions and whatnot is natural and healthy. When you don't have variation, basically with India, the motivation was economical. If you want to be not poor, you better go study a technical field. And as a result, many young women who don't want to go into technical fields, they still end up going into technical fields, because that's one of the few places where if you get into that field, you have a very strong chance of being not poor. So, incentives, economics, is it really that difficult to explain? Or to grasp? To explain is not difficult, but to grasp, it appears to be very difficult with our progressive friends.
Yeah, and I mean, when it comes to this comparison between countries, there's this just this stupid egalitarian assumption that equality is good in and of itself. That if men and women earn an equal amount of money, that's good, and if it's unequal, then that's bad. Well, I'd rather live in a society where, say, men earn $50,000 and women earn $30,000, than a society where they both earn like $1,000 every year. Like, obviously, if you're a woman, the first society is a lot better for you.
Yeah, absolutely. When it comes to these kinds of disparities, I remember poking fun in an open debate with a formerly quite influential journalist in this country. In the meantime, he was humiliated so many times that nobody employs him anymore. But when he organized the public debate of a progressive journalist, he basically said that, oh my God, look, we, as in Romania, we're outsmarted even by the Africans, because look how progressive their numbers are. And it was also the same thing with the market segregation, gender pay gap, and whatnot. And I'm like, I'm pretty sure that at least 90% of women in Rwanda would move to Romania tomorrow if they had the chance. I'm pretty sure they would love to be unequal and oppressed in this country than to be equal and empowered in Rwanda. Because again, I mean, as you said, you look at the wages. I mean, yes, you're equal with your husband in Rwanda by earning like $700 a year. Whereas you can be a little bit unequal in this country and make probably $800 a month. I don't know, just saying. And your husband can make double that, and overall, you'll probably be better off being oppressed here than empowered and equal in Rwanda. Just saying.
Yeah, I mean also like because of monogamy, because most people live in a relationship with the member of the opposite sex, these differences in income by sex are not actually that important in terms of the well-being of men versus women.
Yeah.
Uh, because if you live in a in a marriage and you have a husband and a wife both earning money, if whether the husband earns more money or the wife earns more money, or whether it's equal, it doesn't really matter very much. What matters is the total amount of money that both people earn. And
Yeah.
if that's high, that's good. If it's low, it's bad.
Yeah.
For most people,
And
that's the important measure,
mhm.
um, not this sort of gender pay gap. Who cares about that?
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. But then again, living in monogamous heterosexual families, that's bad because it takes a village for children, and we shouldn't be having families. I mean, this is legitimately what these people believe. so, so of course they're not going to take into account these kinds of things, because if they would implicitly admit that most of the world simply doesn't work on progressive rules,
Yeah, and
and
I mean,
and likely will never work.
and I mean the whole gender pay gap, at least in most Western countries, really only exists like within families, within marriage, or with single mothers. If you look at men who've never been married and women who've never been married, there really is no gender pay gap generally.
Yeah, actually,
Or it
women who've
goes
never
the
been
other way
married.
around.
Yeah, women
Uh,
who've never been married earn more. Yeah,
yeah, but the whole reason that gender pay gap exists is because when men and women marry, what typically happens is that the man's income goes up and the woman's income goes down because the man takes on um, more hours at work, is more focused on career because he now has to support a family. He's supposed to be the main earner. He's not just responsible for himself, but for several people. Whereas the woman now becomes, primarily the homemaker who cares about the children and so on. Might still work, but work is no longer her primary occupation. So her income goes down, and that's the main reason for this gender pay gap.
yeah,
And in
and there's
precisely
nothing
these
wrong with
kind of
that.
arrangements, gender pay gap doesn't really matter, because what matters is not who earns the money, but who gets to decide on what the money is spent.
Yeah, and there again, most consumer choices are decided by women. But it betrays this materialistic view of the world for progressives. I mean, if women make an equal amount of money with men, that automatically means that everyone is happy in their mind. When in reality, there are many individuals, and especially many women, who don't actually function like that in the real world. For a significant portion of women, I would even say a vast majority, but let's say just a significant, a plurality of women, having a fulfilled family with the one, two, or three children and caring for them is a lot more fulfilling and makes them a lot happier than being, I don't know, an upper executive in a big corporation and making, I don't know, 500,000 euros a year or a million a year. And progressives that just don't seem to care about these things. They only equate the material wealth expressed in direct taxable income as happiness, and nothing else can constitute happiness in their mind.
Yeah, I mean, of course, material wealth is something that you can easily measure, whereas happiness is sort of fuzzy and hard to measure.
Yeah,
Um,
sure.
I mean, the thing is that yes, it's true that money does bring you happiness to an extent, but there's very much diminishing returns there. That if you have very little money, then money is very important, which is why you find that in developing countries, like in India, for example, you find a lot more equal um, sex distribution in stuff like engineering and computer programming and so on, because just women go where the money is. Because when you have very little money, then job satisfaction and happy family life don't play as much of a role because you just like need the money.
Yeah.
Whereas if you're already doing reasonably well, then most people, and especially most women, um, aren't willing to go to a job that they don't enjoy just to get a little bit more money.
Yeah, we even made this point a year ago on this show that an average, barely educated woman can make a very very decent, can have a very very decent standard of living as a social worker, working, I don't know, 6 hours a day in Sweden, and not only a decent standard of living, but a standard of living much higher than the very very hard working woman in computer science in India. So uh, when you have these kinds of differences, obviously different choices appear. Basically, you can afford more choices in quote unquote egalitarian societies, or whereas I would say, developed capitalist societies. Right. Let's go to the next one. Coming from the British Brainwash Corporation, plan not to give HPV vaccine to boys causes concern. A decision not to vaccinate boys against a cancer-causing sexually transmitted infection has attracted fierce criticism. Reported cases of human papilloma virus (HPV), thought to cause about 80% of cervical cancers, have fallen sharply since girls were given the vaccine. But the Joint Committee on Vaccination and Immunization found little evidence to justify treating boys too. Critics said vaccinating boys could help reduce the risk still further. Across the United Kingdom, all girls aged 12 to 13 are offered HPV vaccination as part of the NHS childhood vaccination program. Mary Ramsay, head of the immunization at Public Health England, said, quote, evidence from around the world suggests that the risk of HPV infection in males is dramatically reduced by achieving high uptake of the HPV vaccine among girls. While there are some additional benefits to vaccinating both males and females, the current models indicate that extending the program to boys in the United Kingdom, where the uptake in adolescent girls is consistently high, over 85%, would not represent a good use of NHS resources. This initial recommendation by the JCVI will now be subject to a public consultation, and the final decision will be made in October. The British Dental Association said it would urge the committee to reconsider the evidence. The chair of the BDA, Vic Armstrong, said, quote, HPV has emerged as the leading cause of oropharyngeal cancer, so the JCVI's unwillingness to expand the vaccination program to boys is frankly indefensible, close quote. Shirley Kramer of the Royal Society for Public Health said, quote, we are deeply disappointed by the JCVI's decision today, which suggests that fundamental priorities are focused more on saving money than on saving lives. Such a simple vaccination program has the potential to make such a big impact on the public's health on a national scale. We hope that the government's advisory committee reconsider this decision as soon as possible and put the public health and well-being before cost saving, close quote. Um, Interesting argument and counterfactual, because even the BBC admits that actually it is a lot more cost saving from a socialist NHS perspective to actually vaccinate boys than not to.
Yeah, I mean, that doesn't directly follow from what is in this article, but at least seems quite likely.
Well, yeah, in the article, even lower than that, it says that treating HPV-related diseases in men costs 58 million pounds per year, whereas vaccinating would cost only 20 million pounds, which it seems to me like a small number, 20 million pounds. It's really peanuts. I mean, I expected it to cost even more than that, but okay. I'll trust the BBC on this one, although I'll probably regret that. Uh, but still, I mean, vaccination programs is probably one of the. I mean, it's probably one of those things that I could reasonably agree them to be made by the state. And especially in these cases where you already have vaccination for girls, I really don't understand why the resistance to include boys in that program too. I just don't understand. As this guy says, it's frankly indefensible, and it kind of is.
Yeah, I mean, these vaccinations are even more important for girls than for boys, but they're still like reasonably important for boys, and um, it seems quite inexpensive and has a pretty high payoff. So it just seems like pretty much a no-brainer to me. But I don't know if there's some like stronger arguments for that are not being put forth in this article, but it just seems like a pretty clear-cut case to me.
Yeah, I mean, Norway already introduced a vaccination program for boys and girls, I think, starting from this year. My country starts it from the next year, too. Hungary also starts it either this year or next year. I forgot exactly the date. It pretty much seems that it is kind of slowly kickstarting. I mean, this is a topic that I spoke first time I spoke about this was 6 years ago in 2011, and it was a radical idea to even suggest it. And nowadays, it's already policy in at least 4 countries in Europe that I know of. It probably even more than that. But again, it's not a big deal. It's not a huge cost for the government. It probably is a net benefit for the government if you're really looking at it from a socialist perspective, which I don't. But and more importantly, considering now that when you have, and this is especially true for Britain, where you have people traveling even a lot more than in the intermarium or in Eastern Europe, you have so many individuals. I mean, again, maybe there is a high vaccination rate for girls, over 85% in Britain, but is it the same in Pakistan? There's a lot of Pakistani women in Britain. I don't think so. Is it similarly high? I don't know, in India or in Russia. I don't know. So you would, by vaccinating boys, you would also protect individuals who would become immigrants later on. And again, HPV is also sexually transmitted among men. So homosexuals are also at an increased risk by not providing the vaccine. I mean, it just seems to me that weird that there is this joint committee so opposed to this being introduced as policy. Just weird.
Yeah, and when it comes to vaccination, building up this sort of herd immunity is very important. If you have a very high a degree of diffusion of this vaccination, that really clamps down on the risk of people being exposed to disease. Even those who don't have the vaccine are then protected to a significant degree.
Yep.
And that's it's like really one of the strongest, most straightforward examples of positive externalities of having some sort of benefit that accrues to third parties who are not part of the decision making. So you have this vaccine which protects the person that you vaccinate, but you also get this very important secondary benefit of also protecting other people from being infected by that person. So that's why, as far as government programs goes, vaccination programs are pretty much the most justifiable that you can think of, basically.
Yeah, yeah. And again, it's really not that expensive. I mean, it's not like it's £5,000 a dose or something like that. So with a population of several tens of millions, like in the case of Britain, it wouldn't be. It's really inexpensive considering the size of the state and whatnot. I mean, if it's really down to it, oh my God, we don't have enough money to implement this program. I don't know. Maybe cut from some of the free breast enlargement surgeries or sex change surgeries and other a whole plethora of completely useless services offered by the NHS. Save up from there and use it on this one. It's going to be a lot more important.
Yep.
And it's going to bring a lot more health to the society at large. Right, let's go to the next one. Speaking of places where they don't have an high HPV vaccination rate, go ahead, please.
Coming from The Guardian, taboo-busting sex guide offers advice to Muslim women seeking fulfilling love lives. It was a confession by a newlywed friend about her disastrous sex life that gave Muladat an idea for a groundbreaking book. Published last week, the Muslima Sex Manual, a halal guide to mind-blowing sex, is the first such guide written by a Muslim woman. The author has chosen to stay anonymous, using an alias. Candid advice is offered on everything from kissing to cowgirl positions, with the core message being that Muslim women can and should enjoy a varied sex life and take the lead in physical relationships. While some critics have accused the author of fetishizing Muslim women and encouraging promiscuity, the book has been welcomed by readers who have lauded her as a Muslim belle de jour, bringing a taboo subject into the open. Quote, I've received encouraging feedback, but also a significant number of demeaning and disgusting messages, said Muladat. One woman said it's not needed, they learn everything from their mothers. I doubt any mother speaks in as explicit detail as I have. I put an emphasis on having sex only with your spouse, but having the full range of sexual experiences with that spouse. Islamically, there's an emphasis on enjoying physical relationships within the context of marriage, not just for procreation. It is the wife's right that her husband satisfy her sexually. Muslim women's organizations have praised her, saying the book will empower Muslim women and protect them from entering into sexually abusive relationships. Shaista Gohir, the chair of the Muslim Women's Network UK, which runs the Muslim Women's Hotline or Helpline, said, I'm all for women talking about sex. Why shouldn't they? Talking about sex in Islam is not new, and past scholars highlighted the importance of sexual pleasure for women, which included advice for men to ensure this happens. However, in practice, sex seems to be all about men's pleasure. Cases often come up on our helpline where women's complaints range from being forced into participating in unwanted sexual acts, rape, to being treated like a piece of meat with zero effort made to ensure the woman has an orgasm. I suspect the problem is much bigger, as most would feel too embarrassed to talk about it. Muradat said she felt compelled to write the book after she discovered women were entering into a lifelong commitment with little knowledge about sex, other than snippets gleaned from the back of guides to marriage, with an emphasis on what was forbidden rather than what was allowed, and with little from the perspective of women. Muradat also found that a confusion about what sex acts were permissible in Islam was inhibiting women from experimenting in the bedroom. Quote, outside the house, culture varies a lot. Inside the bedroom, the concerns and desires of Muslim women from around the world were strikingly similar, she said. After holding informal workshops, she set up a website to ascertain interest in a book. Such was the response that Muladat is increasingly considering a follow-up after being inundated with emails from men also looking for advice. I didn't find any guides to sex aimed at Muslims, women or otherwise. There are plenty of books already on marriage, but spicing up a Muslim sex life or staying halal, there's nothing. The author chose to stay anonymous, partly for fear of a backlash, but also because she didn't want to be known in a tight-knit community as the sex book auntie. Initially, I thought my real name would add credibility, but it's a sensitive topic, said Muladat. Whether it's ethnicity, socioeconomic status, or religiosity, people who want to attack the book will invariably do so by attacking the author. By separating my real self from the book, people are forced to deal with the content. What she will reveal, though, is that she's an American-born psychology graduate, and much of the book is based on a personal experience of keeping the spark alive within her own marriage, along with tips picked up from friends and old copies of Cosmopolitan. My biggest qualification is the knowledge which comes only with experience. A doctor can explain the biology, but if you want an attractive physique, you're better off learning from a bodybuilder than an overweight doctor.
What the hell do you say to this? I don't know. I guess it's good news. I would support this book just purely on uh, cynical political points. Anything that can subvert the Islamic hardliners has my vote. I don't have to agree with it. um, Generally, though, I'm not so convinced that this will necessarily be helpful. I mean, come on. She cites the source of inspiration, Cosmopolitan, which is by far the worst source one can draw inspiration from. And she's an American born psychology graduate, hardly your typical Muslim.
Yeah.
Let's
I mean,
see.
as for the theological claims in this book, I have no idea how to evaluate that. I mean, I haven't read the book, and I'm not exactly an expert on Islamic theology, so I don't know if all that's contained in the book is actually halal. Um,
It
but
may
yeah,
indeed be, but I'm not so convinced that anyone will care because, again, it's not. I mean, yeah, maybe people will care. I don't know, in Dearborn, Michigan. Yeah, maybe Muslims there will give a toss and whatnot. But Muslims in I don't know, Syria. I don't think so. Indonesia, Malaysia. I don't think so. I just don't think so.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not sure if it's aimed at Muslims in Muslim countries. I mean, the book is written in English and published in, I think, the UK, so probably more aimed at Muslims living in English-speaking countries. Um,
But again, Muslims living in the US are a different breed than the Muslims living in Britain or Canada. Because in Britain and Canada, the ghettoization and segregation has been encouraged as a hallmark of multiculturalism. So they tend to be a lot more radical than the Muslims in countries where they were forced to interact with the outside world. So you would expect on the on the topic of sexual morality, a lot more radicalization and a lot more hardline thought in, I don't know, the mosques in London or in the mosques in Stockholm or in Malmö or anywhere in Canada than in places where they're a lot more dispersed and forced to interact with the outside world. And this is evidenced even by those numbers published by the Pew Research Center. The Muslims in the US held the least amount of radical beliefs on anything, including sexual morality, than the Muslims living in France, Britain, Canada, Sweden, and so on.
yeah, certainly the case. How much influence the book's going to have, I of course don't know, but I
Still
think
funny.
what influence it has is I think it will generally be good. Um, what I also found interesting a piece you cut here from the article is that men were writing to her asking her to write a follow-up book on how they can please their wives, which is quite interesting. But it shows that contrary to the sort of stereotypes of Muslim men being misogynists and oppressing their women, most Muslim men, just like most men, actually genuinely care about their wives and want them to be happy.
Yeah, which again, it's not really a surprise. I mean, yeah, the number of the proportion of individuals with very radical and fucked up beliefs is higher amongst Muslims, but that doesn't necessarily follow that most of the rest of the populace, the non-radical ones, are really that different, especially when it comes to these things. I mean, the sex lives and the family life of people hasn't really changed that much pretty much anywhere in the world in the last several hundreds of years. I mean, we tend to look at what the elites in various places in the world used to promote and do, but when it comes to your average pleb, I'm not really that convinced that anything has really changed fundamentally.
I mean, of course, what changed a lot in the last couple of decades was the availability of contraceptives.
Yeah.
That's a major factor, but other than that, in terms of like the sexual mores, not that much has changed really. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Also,
But
let's not forget. Go ahead, please.
people often very much overestimate how prudish people used to be in the past.
Yeah.
Sort of idea that like before the 1960s, no one talked about sex, or that sex was something that was universally considered to be like shameful or something like that. Like, no, it's not the case.
No.
People have been having wild sex for pretty much as long as people existed.
Yeah, yeah, and let's not forget, since we're at the Islamic world topic, in the Persian Empire, so in the 16th century, even earlier than that, there was this particular rule, which actually is still enforced today in modern Iran, believe it or not. That basically, once I shut down or close the doors of my house, of my property, what happens beyond that door is the business of exactly the people inside that house. So, anything, orgies, booze, drugs, whatever. It's not the business. Even in the Islamic Theocratic Republic of Iran, this still applies. If I get caught drinking alcohol outside in public, I could spend a lot of years in an Iranian gulag. But if I organize an orgy inside my property, the state is none of its business, because it's a private party, and these things still do happen. I mean, Ali Mihrashpan talked to us about how prudish really Iranian women and men are? And it's the answer is pretty much no, not that much. They're not really that different than what we can see pretty much anywhere in Europe. Yeah, sure, the state says this and that, but does anyone really care? Well, especially people under the age of 40, no, not much.
That's really interesting. Maybe we should think about introducing that rule in the West that, what happens inside your home is none of the government's business.
Yeah, we definitely need some Persian wisdom introduced here. Yeah, for sure, for sure. Here and in North America, the New Yorkers might need that rule. This definitely with all their rules. How you can't drink a soda that is bigger than half a pound or a pound, you
What
can't
happened to milk?
smoke inside your own apartment, even if it's your property, and things like that. I mean, maybe they would need some Persian wisdom on this.
Consuming dangerous liquids like
Yeah.
like normal milk.
Yeah, of course, yeah, yeah. Well, again, milk should be banned entirely because it's a symbol of white supremacy. So,
Yeah, of course. I mean, it's white, and
right. Let's go to the next one.
Okay, the next one comes from Germany, from the Frankfurter Allgemeine Zeitung. Equal pay for women football players. Football nations of the world. Behold, Lewes Football Club, 8th Division, Isthmian League, Division 1 South with their men's team, and FA Women's Premier League, Southern Division, 3rd Division with their women's team. This is where progress and history is made. Yes, indeed. In Lewes, East Sussex County, population 16,000. Previous historical landmarks, an important battle in the 13th century, the worst avalanche disaster in the history of the British Isles. Britain is strange. 8 killed in an avalanche on the 27th of December in 1836, less than 10 miles off the coast of the English Channel. And now, Lewes has the first football club in which women earn as much as men. Fair enough. An easy target for ridicule. 8th Division, haha. What do you make there? 3 pints in the pub? That'll do the women good too. Funny. Or perhaps not. How does that look when seen from the bright side of football? From above, from the very top, from the perspective of the DFB, the Deutsche Fußballbund, the German association. Something like this. What the Confed Cup winners got for the victory in Russia was very moderate, President Grindel had said before the tournament. 50,000 euros. Moderate? Certainly. Outright modest if you, for example, compare it to the 100,000 euros that every A-team member of the German national squad received for losing against France in the semis at last year's Euro Cup. Even more so when compared to the 300,000 euros for every world champion in 2014. 300,000 would also have been paid for the UEFA Cup in France in the event of a victory. Keep those numbers in mind. The DFB women begin the European Cup on Monday. If they take the title, the German players will receive, are you sitting down? Hold tight to your seats. 37,500 euros. 1/8 of the bonus of the men. By the way, you didn't actually need to hold on tight. Just a little joke, but I'll cut it out now. If you now say, but that's 15,000 euros more than at the last Euro Cup, you'd be quite right. But the women would have got 65,000 euros for a World Cup win. This nice little difference currently only exists for the DFB women. But I can already hear the voices of reason objecting. They're deep, masculine. Of course there's more money in the men's game. Of course the ratings are better. On the one hand, yes. On the other hand, so what? What is stopping the DFB from paying the same bonuses to men and women, at least for the national teams? When the American female ice hockey players threatened to not show up to the World Championship in March if their support and their pay wasn't improved substantially, they received a lot of support, including from the Players' Union of the Professional Men's League, the NHL. Even the strike of the men's national team was debated as a token of solidarity. Back home, it seems unimaginable that such gentlemen as Neuer, Hummels, and Özil would make such a threat to help such ladies as Schult, Gößling, and Mittag. By the way, the UEFA pays 300,000 euros to every national organization whose female players are participating in the UEFA Cup in the Netherlands. On their website, the UEFA points to their seminar breaking the glass ceiling on the topic of social responsibility, which was held in December of 2014 in Amsterdam. The most important topic was institutionalized discrimination in football, they write. 2014, well, and since then, the men's UEFA Cup was played. There, the 24 men's national teams received 8 million for showing up, 26.67 times as much as for the women in the subsequent year.
Yeah, so yeah, one point of information. The fact that some nobody from the NHL offered support for the other nobodies, which is U.S. national females football squad, mattered for exactly
Yes,
jack
that's
shit.
the football squad. It was ice hockey squad.
Oh, okay. I see. Well, it still didn't matter. Their pay wasn't increased, and no one cared. And they were basically told, "Oh, you don't want to show up to the World Cup? Fine, then don't show up. We'll summon other players." And obviously, none of them actually followed through with their threat. The same thing happened with the football squad in the United States. They were like, "Oh, look, we are world champion in female football and whatnot. We should be paying more." And yeah, sure, Obama called them in for a photo op and whatnot. But did anything change? No, because in the end, economics matters a lot more. And they were told exactly the same thing. Oh, you don't want to show up to the Olympics? You're gonna boycott? Fine, then don't show up. We're gonna summon other girls who want to play for the United States at the Olympics at the pay that the market can bear. You don't like it? Tough luck. And
I mean,
again, none of them followed through with their threat, and none of them will.
yeah, and if there's any discrimination here, it's discrimination in favor of women,
In favor of women,
because
absolutely.
if you have football players who play equally well as this national team, and they're men, they're not paid 1/8 or anything like that. They're paid zero because
Yeah,
no one wants to see them play. Because the only reason um, people want to see players of that caliber play is because these players happen to be women.
absolutely, absolutely. Um, and also it says here, oh, but I wouldn't expect individuals like Herren Neuer, Hubbels, and Özil to be in line for people like Damon Schult, Gösling. I mean, like people who like who?
Schultz, like never heard of these people at
I
any
mean,
point in my life.
I know who Neuer is and Hummels is and Özil. I actually have an autograph from Özil myself, from Monsieur Özil. I know who these people are, but I have no idea who the people in the second part of the enumeration are. I have no idea. I presume they're women who play football, but I have no idea.
Yeah, I would guess that less than 10% of the people reading that article have heard of any of these three women. Like not
Absolutely.
not not being like familiar with them, but like just having heard that name before.
Yeah, yeah. I've heard of a Göstling, but it's a chap who plays in the second division for Alemannia Aachen, I think. He's a very good central defender, but it's a
Maybe it's
man.
like a brother or a cousin or something. I don't know.
Probably,
Could
yeah.
be.
But yeah, generally, this whole thing with women's football, it's really that simple. I mean, I've told the story before. I personally played against a football squad, a women's football squad that was ranked at the time like the 30th or the 29th in Europe. And we beat the crap out of them. Like 17-3 was the final score in a match that lasted 60 minutes, not 90. So yeah, no, sorry. No. As you said, if there is a man that plays as good as the national squad of the women's football, nobody wants to see him. They're paid zero. I mean, we were
Yeah,
amateurs.
it won't even get paid 3 pints at the bar.
Yeah,
You get
absolutely.
nothing.
You get nothing. Yeah. And again, this sounds very mean when you put it in these practical terms, and probably it is mean. But at the end of the day, women's football is just crap. And as you said, the only reason people want to see it is because it's women, not for the quality of the game. The quality of the game is absolute crap. I mean, it's way beneath eighth league, and it's fine. I mean, again, we don't have to all be equal. It doesn't it doesn't say necessarily something about oh, they should try to do better. Yeah, maybe they should try to do better, but they'll never do significantly better because variations between individuals, variations between sexes, and that's fine. It's absolutely fine. Most men cannot play as good as Mesut Özil, and that's fine too.
Yeah. Also, well, interesting or funny about this article is that he sort of makes the kind of arguments that his detractors would make. Actually, her, I don't know actually know whether it's a man or woman writing this, and then just dismisses them like with "so what." That's just really funny. Like, yes, these good arguments against my position, but I'm just gonna ignore them because so
Yeah,
what? Who cares?
yeah, and at some moment, well, there, she, he, there, z, whatever. This individual says that, oh, but even if that all of that is true, what does it stop the DFB to pay women and men similarly? And I'm like, economics.
Yeah. So it is actually a man who written this,
Yeah.
Christoph
Okay.
Becker.
Yeah. Okay. What does it? What does it? Why is the DFB stopped from paying equally? Well, it's called economics. You just can't. I mean, basically, his argument is let's subsidize women's football even more than it already is.
I think the thinking behind it is sort of that um, people are paid for being good at playing football, and these women are also like sort of the best women at playing football, and therefore they should also be paid an equal amount. But the thing is, men are not paid for because they're good at football. It's they're paid because they're good at football, and lots of people want to watch them play football.
Yeah.
It's
Yeah.
not that you're getting paid for just being good at something. It's you paid for being good at something, and that thing is something that other people want to pay money for.
Yeah, and you have
If
results that draw even more people to want to see. Because again, I can be as good as Lionel Messi. If nobody sees me, I don't make any shekel just because I'm good at it.
yeah, there's lots of sort of obscure sports and games where the best people in the world earn nothing because no one wants to watch these kinds of
Yeah,
games.
yeah,
Lots and lots of these games. There's only a very very small subset of all possible games and sports where we can make any money, and you might say that's unfair or something. But I mean, why should you be paid just because you're good at a game? I
yeah.
mean, games are supposed to be fun, and if you can make money off them too, then that's like an added bonus. But you don't have any right to expect to make money for playing a game.
Absolutely, absolutely. All right, we're getting close to a 90 minute, and we still have quite a few of them. So let's go to the next one.
Okay, the next one is on a bit more serious topic, also from the FAZ. 547 Domspatzen victims of abuse. After 2 years, the investigation of the abuse scandal at the world-renowned choir, the Regensburg Domspatzen, has been concluded. On Tuesday in Regensburg, the independent special investigator Ulrich Weber was charged with the investigation by the Bishopric of Regensburg, put the number of confirmed victims at 547. Weber told journalists that he continues to believe that the true number is around 700 victims. The 450 pages long report was published online. It speaks of 500 Domspatzen having had to endure physical violence since 1945 and 67 sexual violence. According to the report, all institutions are affected, i.e. schools, boarding schools, and music schools. Among the 49 people who have been ascertained to be quote, very likely to be perpetrators, 9 had engaged in sexual harassment. Among the perpetrators were boarding school headmasters, a headmaster of a preschool, prefects, and many employees. Most of the incidents took place in the 1960s and 70s. Until 1992, all reports were about physical violence. Victims had described the preschools in Ettertshausen and Pielenhoven as hell, a prison, or a concentration camp, the report says. Many spoke of the worst time of their life, marked by fear, violence, and helplessness. Physical violence had been routine and often brutal, and there was frequently a severe imbalance between a rule violation and the attending punishment. All of the incidents had been at the time, quote, against the rules and illegal, with few exceptions. Almost all the people in charge at the Domspatzen had at least partial knowledge about the violent incidents, but hadn't exhibited much interest in the matter. Protecting the institution had been the focus. The fates of the victims had been ignored, and some of the accused had been protected, the report states. Weber spoke of a culture of silence and also placed part of the blame on former cathedral Kapellmeister Georg Ratzinger, brother of Pope Emeritus Josef Ratzinger. He had been guilty of, quote, looking the other way and failing to intervene despite his knowledge. There was, however, no evidence that Ratzinger had known about any sexual violence, Weber specified upon request. Dereliction of duty by parents and neglect by the church and the state was partly responsible that no measure against the violence were taken. Weber stated that he hoped that his investigation can help victims make their peace. Among other things, the bishopric promised victims a compensation between 5,000 and 20,000 euros per person. Based on Weber's report, a special committee will decide on that issue. So far, reports have been filed by 300 people. An estimated 2 to 3 million euros would have to be paid out. Now, I have a question for you. Based on this report, what would you estimate is the sex ratio among the victims of this abuse?
I would presume virtually all are boys.
100% boys.
Yeah.
Because what this article does not mention is that the Domspatzen are a boys' choir.
I didn't know if it was a boys' choir or not, but the way, I mean, if it doesn't mention the sex of the victim, a very, very good rule of thumb is to assume that the victims are boys.
Yep.
There's that. On the other hand, 547 confirmed victims since 1945 and until 1992, if I got this correct. I don't know if it's a lot or not. I mean, how many people, how many boys have been through those schools between 1945 and 1992?
I don't know, but it probably not like a huge number of people, but of course a lot more than these 547 or 700.
Okay, let's say 700 between 1945 and 1992. Is it fair to say that at the very least 15,000 people have been through these schools?
I don't really know exact numbers, but I mean most of this abuse took place in the 60s and 70s, so it's a much shorter time period. Like in the more recent history, that this sort of stuff hasn't been happening anymore.
Because I'm asking purely out of intellectual curiosity, because in other places, for instance in Spain and in the United States, there was the initial outrage, which most of it was justifiable, don't get me wrong, but when one looked a little bit closer at the numbers, it turned out that the rate of abuse in such environments was either equal or smaller than in public schools. So in other words, one can make the argument that the individuals who perpetrated this abuse should be buried under the jail, but one cannot make the argument that these kinds of environments are particularly dangerous or more dangerous than quote-unquote secular environments. So that's why I'm asking you about overall numbers, just so I can ascertain the proportion of the abuses, if it's really that unusually high, or it's just pretty much normal for that period. And whilst it is regrettable, it doesn't really say much about the overall thing.
Yeah, I would have to look at that in more detail, but I do believe that it's like unusually high levels of abuse and violence there, but I haven't looked at it in enough detail to be able to say that confidently.
And again, I hate to be that guy that tries to put in these kinds of questions in there, but in the same period, this was a period of incredibly high levels of not sexual promiscuity but sexual abuse. I mean, this is also especially the 70s and the early 80s is the period when the pedophile group in the Green Party had their own kindergartens where they would experiment with children, or as they would put it, they would empower children sexually. Not joking, that's their language. So it is a period when it just appears now, looking in hindsight, that significant well, not a significant portion, but a lot of actors with power in society, churches, political parties, whatnot, just seem to have had a period when they were really into this. And I don't know if that was by accident or there was something else that drove this thing, because it hasn't happened since, and we don't know if it has been happening till then. Maybe it was, maybe it wasn't.
Yeah, but I mean, most of the incidents here are not about sexual abuse. Mostly, it's about physical violence.
Hmm. Well, as for physical violence, can we at least attempt to be honest and say that physical violence was pretty much part of most schools, whether secular or not, or religious, uh, until at least the 70s or 80s in most places? And I don't think Germany was really that different in this regard. I mean, teachers beating children for breaking minor rules was, even in movies, was presented as pretty much normal, and something, nothing to be worried about in the 50s or 60s or 40s or even earlier than that.
Yeah, but what you're talking about here is something that just goes beyond just
Mhm.
regular corporal punishment. I mean, they do say here that most of the incidents were in fact even at the time illegal. So
Yeah, I see.
yeah,
As for the compensation, okay, fine, as long as the church pays for it, not the state.
yeah,
Uh,
it's the church that pays it,
and yeah, if
or the
some of the,
bishopric rather.
especially the ones with the sexual abuse, if the perpetrators are still alive, maybe a free helicopter ride or burying them beneath the prison. That sounds like appropriate.
Yeah, I
Uh,
think like in most of these cases, it's already
yeah, probably the
past the
perpetrators are dead or past the
statute of
statute of
limitation.
limitation. Hmm. Hmm.
Some of these, of course, are dead, and others it's like too long ago.
Hmm. Yeah,
But I mean, the statute of limitation, they do make sense because if you come to this sort of crime, 30 years later, it's very hard to prove anything beyond reasonable
absolutely,
doubt. So it
absolutely.
makes
I'm
sense that if a certain amount of time has passed, you don't even attempt to prove it.
Yeah, I'm for statute of limitations too, and it is a little bit worrying to me when I see jurisdictions, not necessarily entire countries, but Bundesland or areas in some countries or U.S. states who come up with these absurd notions of, yeah, we shouldn't be having any statute of limitation on issues like pedophilia or rape, and I'm like, no, yes, we should, absolutely, we should. Because, as you said, how the hell are you going to prove beyond reasonable doubt 30 years after the incident? It's the same thing that happened, with the uh, Cosby, the more recent case, or that guy who died, and then things emerged about him in Britain. Jimmy Savile, I think. Same thing. Yeah, maybe the guy was a monster, but how the hell do we prove that now after so many years?
Yeah, I mean, you can't just arrest someone or like throw someone in jail based on lots of nasty rumors. And I
Yeah.
mean, often when there's a smoke, there's often a fire, but not always. And you have to
Oh.
have this high standards of evidence in criminal trials.
Hmm. Hmm. Right. Speaking of criminal trials, the next two pieces of news are precisely about this thing: sexual abuse on children and things like that. We're gonna trigger a lot of people. So, coming with from Verdensgang in Norway, boy 17 criminally convicted for not having deleted the quote-unquote puppet picture. The boy did nothing to get the picture, but it was possible to delete it. A 17-year-old has been convicted in the district court for the possession of images that sexualize children. The boy had not asked to have the picture sent to him, but was still convicted in accordance with Section 311 of the Criminal Code for being in possession of the picture. The boy has to pay a fine, but he also chose to appeal the sentence. The appeal was rejected. We note that even though there was dissent in the district court, the appeal court rejected the plea. I have not been in contact with my client and therefore cannot comment on the matter beyond this, said the boy's defense attorney, Roy Artide. According to the section, one may be convicted to imprisonment for up to 3 years or with a fine for the production of sexual assault against children or sexualized content. That's a very weird formulation. Anyway, police attorney Rolf Mikkelsen explains that this section also deals with such images. You do not want such images to be in circulation, and you want to prevent further spread. The spreading of such images is in itself a major assault of the depicted, and that is what we want to prevent, explains Mikkelsen. According to the judgment, the 17-year-old received a picture on his mobile phone. The image was sent over the chat service. Skipping a bit furthermore, the judgment states that the image is sexualized and that the boy was aware of the girl's age. As he tried to delete the image but did not make it, the court found that he was in possession of that image in a legal sense. If you receive such a picture, you have an obligation to do what you can to delete it, says Mikkelsen. If you do not delete the image over a certain amount of time, you may be subject to criminal liability. In the judgment, the boy said he did not manage to delete the image without deleting the entire conversation thread with the sender, which he did not want. The image was eventually deleted during the police inquiry. According to the judgment, it went well over 2 months before the image was deleted, and the court thinks the boy took an active choice when he chose not to delete the picture or the discussion thread. The judgment states that the boy was aware that this image was illegal because the image had previously flourished on social media at school, and other students at the school were then convicted of spreading the image. It has become very common to share a lot on social media without thinking so carefully about what you share. But not all that can be shared should be shared, says Mikkelsen. Basically, this is a picture of a girl that she herself has taken, and the girl is also 17 or 16 and a half, something like that. This is where I don't make too many friends when when I say that these kinds of things should actually be legal. Uh, I mean, come on, give me a freaking break. 16-year-olds are allowed to get married legally in Norway and most of Europe, actually. Yet for some reason, they're not mature enough to take a picture of themselves and share it, and the people who then look at it have to be criminally liable for it. Give me a fucking break.
Yeah, also, like, in my mind, even if it was a picture of, I don't know, a 5-year-old girl, it still seems wrong to me that it's illegal merely to not delete the image.
No.
Like, this boy has presumably not put any effort into procuring this picture. It was just sent to him.
Yep.
And why should he then have some sort of positive obligation of deleting the image?
Yeah, and let's be
I mean,
even more.
I can see why he wouldn't be allowed to share it further. Why that would be illegal if it's a 5-year-old, say. I can certainly understand that, but just like possessing the image which someone else sent you without your request or even your permission, that just seems unreasonable.
Yeah, and let's be even more incisive on this. I mean, the way that the Norwegian law is formulated, and there are many countries in Europe that have these kinds of nonsense on the books. A sexualized image of a child can mean so many things. Basically, in some countries of Europe, some of my own pictures when I was, I don't know, 3 months old or something like that, would be deemed illegal, even though none of them were made for sexual purposes. But having those pictures of myself with me could land me in jail. Uh, this whole thing is a total clusterfuck. Um, as far as I'm concerned, I understand the feeling, and we've talked about this several times on this show, that you can't really be the guy that defends child porn. And it's easy. It's an easy political win for any politician to argue, yeah, we should ban everything, do everything, throw the book at everyone, and that's understandable. Everyone wants to protect children. But then there's these cases where where if you drop the emotion part, you suddenly realize that it's actually not in the best interest of neither children nor the society to actually throw the book at everyone. I
Yeah,
mean,
how about
serious. A slutty 16-year-old takes a picture of herself, and now everyone goes to jail for looking at it and having it on their phone, even though she herself shared it. And it's not like she was hacked or something. No, no, no. She shared it out of her own volition. Why is that a problem?
yeah, how about we protect children by protecting the 17-year-old boy from unreasonable persecution by
Yeah.
the Norwegian law?
Mhm. Yeah, and again, this is not Norway specific. It just happens that this case comes from Norway. Soon enough, Britain will have porn identification ID. So basically, you have to not just require the required permission from the government to be allowed to even have unfiltered internet, but then you'll have to also submit your credit card details even for free porn. They want to implement this starting of next April. I'm going to comment that in a separate video on the channel. It's amazing, and I really don't understand. And again, I'm not a particularly big fan of mass pornography, but I am a very big fan of freedom of expression. And at the end of the day, if 16-year-olds can get married, 16-year-olds can have a sex life and whatnot, then surely they should have the right to take pictures of themselves and share them, no matter how disgusting one may think those pictures are.
Yeah, and I mean, we're talking about like a 16 or 17-year-old.
Yeah.
I I just don't see why that should be in any way illegal.
Yeah, I don't see it either. I mean, this whole business that everyone is a child in all respects until the age of 18 is just ludicrous. None of the, at least not in Europe, the law actually does recognize um, that individuals gain autonomy in certain respects a lot earlier than the age of 18. I mean, the age of marriage is 15 or 16 in most of Europe, yeah, I think, except Ireland. The age of sexual consent varies between 12 in the Netherlands and 16 in Britain, most countries being at 14 or 15. Uh, I mean, the legal tradition of Europe, East or West, recognizes these things and has been recognizing them for hundreds of years. Yet, for some reason, because there is a picture on the internet, suddenly we have to apply an entirely puritanical standard that is completely out of sync with the rest of the society.
Yeah, I mean, the thing is, 16-year-olds are sexual creatures.
Yeah, absolutely,
Whether
absolutely.
people want them to be or not, it doesn't matter.
Yeah.
And it may not be particularly smart to put or to send a naked picture of yourself to other people, because it might well end up on the internet, and then once it's on the internet, it's
It's forever.
basically impossible to get rid of it.
Mhm.
So it may be a very stupid thing to do, um, but I don't see why it should be illegal. I mean, there's lots of stupid things that you can do that are perfectly legal. You can also post all sorts of stupid opinions on Facebook that might possibly be harmful to your career or something. But still, that's not illegal.
Mhm.
I mean, some opinions, of course, are illegal in various European countries, but that's also
Yeah,
stupid.
that's also stupid. Yeah, and the thing is that some of these policies and whatnot aren't even are dealt in an incredibly not just gynocentric but completely uneven way. And to explain that further, I'll go to the next one, which goes on the same topic, so we can stay on the same topic. Um, Coming from Adresa, also from Norway. If you take a sexualized picture of a girl under 18, you will be sentenced. If you take a picture, the same kind of picture of a boy under 18, you go free. In December last year, an 18-year-old was convicted of sharing a photo of a boy and a girl who had sex and shared the picture on Snapchat. Basically, the 18-year-old was also charged with the paragraph 311, which includes production of sexual assault against children or sexualizing materials, but was acquitted later on because it was not proven that he knew the girl was under 18. Still, both he and the court knew that the boy was also a minor. It's a bit like saying if you take a sexualized image of a girl under 18, you'll be sentenced, whilst taking a picture of a boy under 18, This will not be captured by either the prosecution or the court. In other words, you go free, says the defendant's attorney, Rune Selbe. The defendants were also charged in court for violating Section 266 of the Criminal Code, which deals with reckless conduct. Selbo is obviously satisfied that his client was not convicted of, under Section 311, but believes that the judicial view of boys and girls in such cases is sneaky. It says a lot about the state of equality in 2017, he adds. Attorney General Eric Verde has brought in court a number of Snapchat cases and confirms that boys and girls are treated differently in court. That's probably right, and that's because such films and pictures hit girls the most. Boys do not meet the same condemnations in society, says Verde. But shouldn't the defendant be convicted of Section 311 in this case when he knew that what party was under 18, asks the reporter. That's right, and both the prosecution and the court have seen too narrowly on it in these cases. Strictly speaking, yes, it should have been caught up that the boy was also under 18. Further says they did not become aware of the problem before we contacted them and that there will be now a change in the prosecution practice. Yes, this is not one of us who has thought about it before, but everyone under the age of 18 should be considered offended regardless of gender. From now on, we will also treat the boys on the same basis as the girls in Snapchat cases. The girls get bad comments if they are on a photo or a movie being scattered, while the boys are being praised. Basically, they are, but basically they are in the same situation. Police attorney Iselin Hoverstein, who was also involved in this case, says, quote, "It was a bit random that there was never a topic in court. In this case, the girl had a clear sense of being violated, but the boy didn't. Quite the opposite, rather. And this is how things often turn out," Hoverstein points out. The girls get bad comments if they are on a photo or a film that is being scattered, while the boys get praise. Further confirms this. We are so keen on the negative Muslim honorary culture, but we are unable to see that we find the exact same elements in our own. It is women who must bear the honor and morale of society. As part of the professional management of the prosecutor, the supervisor led the police in the handling of criminal cases, and I can promise that this will be addressed at the next meeting this fall. The boys should also be considered offended parties if the pictures of them are being spread. Again, let's apply something bad, let's apply it equally bad. No, knuckleheads, none of them should be considered offended parties. I mean, really, two teenagers, 16, 17, having sex and voluntarily submitting themselves to having pictures taken of them, who then the parties themselves share on Snapchat. Now everyone else is guilty of that because they received the pictures? Really? What's the logic in all of this? I mean, I'm trying to understand the logic and I can't.
Yeah, I have no idea. I mean, as for the reasoning here that because girls don't feel or because girls feel more violated, therefore it's proper to focus on girls, that doesn't really hold water. I mean, the law is supposed to be blind. It's supposed to apply equally to everyone. And while it may be true on average that the average girl will feel more violated than the average boy, so what? I mean, there's still you have to apply the law impartially, because otherwise everyone will just pretend to be as victimized and as vulnerable as possible, and then you just get like widely diverging sentences based on how aggrieved a particular judge believes a particular party to be, and that's just a recipe for disaster. You have to have some sort of more or less objective standards.
Yeah. Although this kind of thing of how you feel has become legal standard, not in Norway, but in France. I mean, if you look the wrong way at a woman and she feels threatened, that's automatically enough evidence to assert that sexual harassment has occurred. And the punishment is up to 2 years in jail and 30,000 euros a fine. So, yeah, just saying. I mean, this kind of feeling-based legislation is already policy. Not in Norway yet, but in France.
Yeah, so basically, if you go to France, avert your eyes.
Maybe wear a burqa. That could help. Amazing. But again, go ahead, please.
Burqa doesn't really work. I mean, you can still look at people from a burqa. It's just that they
Yeah,
don't
but
really
you
see
can't
you
know
looking.
if
So I guess that sort of kind of work. But then maybe if the woman feels you're looking at her and she feels harassed in case you were looking at her, maybe that still works.
Yeah, but I'm with transgender Muslims, so I'm higher up
Okay.
on the progressive stack, so they'll let me go. Nobody wants to offend a Muslim in France. Just saying. But on a more serious note, I realize that it's very hard politically to come out and say no. All of these people should be left free, uh, but all of these people should be allowed to go to walk scot free. Seriously, if teenagers have uh, mm, mm, I understand teenagers do stupid things, and they tend to take pictures that maybe they shouldn't, and they tend to share things that maybe they shouldn't. But I don't understand why should other people who just look at this mess have to now go to jail or pay huge fines for the teenagers' irresponsibility. That is to say, assuming that it was irresponsibility in the first place, because in many of these cases, this particular case, at least one party felt, quote unquote, felt violated or aggrieved or whatnot. But there were many other cases where none of the parties had any problems with their pictures being shared around, and still people who looked at them were criminally prosecuted. And that's just insane.
Yeah, I mean, these laws, I don't think that they do very much to stop this kind of spreading of um, irresponsibly shared photos.
Mhm. Yeah, it's basically a misapplication of laws that were intended for something else. These laws were intended to stop people who actually produce actual child porn and then and then sell it or whatnot. Uh, but in this case, it's none of that. And if anything, it kind of normalizes because you know 20 years ago, when you would hear that someone was sentenced for possessing child porn, you would instantly think correctly at the time that, oh my god, this individual was actually witnessing abuse, sexual abuse of children, and was taking pictures or filming it for the purpose of sale. That's disgusting. That's horrible. But nowadays, looking at so many of these cases, when I hear that someone was sentenced for possessing child porn, I'm like, were the children 17 or 7? Because it matters. You know, if the quote unquote children were 17, I'm like, yeah, the law is retarded. Probably the individual is nothing wrong with him. But if the child was 7, then I'm like, where's my helicopter? So, you know, there is a difference. Right. Let's go to the last one. Coming from Sweden, from SVT. On sex discrimination. The school that divided students by gender did not discriminate. The Discrimination Ombudsman has examined the Muslim school Al Azhar for their practice of dividing the students by sex during bus trips. This division is not considered to be discriminatory. On the other hand, the school's way of dividing students in sports classes risks perpetrating discrimination against individuals. It was in April earlier this year that TV4's Kalla Fakta program told us about how a religious school in Vällingby divided students by sex when students were to leave their homes in Tensta and Rinkeby. The girls were referred to go on the bus in the rear while the boys got to the one in front. The program was very noticeable in the spring, and several notifications came in to the Discriminering Ombudsman and the DO. Now the DO has made this statement, quote, as far as bus tours are concerned, we cannot see that there is an infringement. But in connection with the supervision, we also have asked questions about gender-divided sports lessons. There we can see a risk of people being discriminated against, said Klaus Lundstedt, who is the press officer at the DO. In the decision, DO writes that the school, by systematically dividing the students by sex into in sport education classes, risks to violate the prohibition of discrimination. DO asked the Al Azhar school for an opinion after they received notifications, but on the other hand, they did not go to the school to see how the business was actually being conducted. We do that only when we make surveillance. We assessed that the answers that came in now was sufficient to make a decision in this particular case, explained Klaus Lundstedt. So, every gender sameness for everyone. Oh, wait, except for Muslims. We can't have that.
So we have girls being forced to sit in the back bus. That seems the discrimination to me.
No, it's in the separate bus, basically.
Yeah, yes, I said the back bus, not the back of the bus.
Yeah. Well, of course, it's discrimination. The question is whether should the state intervene in such issues. And believe it or not, I actually agree with the state here, with the discriminating ombudsman, in that it shouldn't, because well, attendance to those schools is voluntary. That particular school is a private school. I know it because I've seen it, and I don't like their practices, but it's not for me to like them.
Yeah, I mean, I really dislike this whole word discrimination, how it's taken on this really, really negative connotation. Like discrimination is just, it seems like it's used in place of something like bigotry.
Yeah,
Because I mean, discrimination really what it means is just you
make a
differentiate,
difference.
you
Yeah,
treat different people differently,
yeah.
and that can be entirely justifiable. It can be based on some sort of misapprehension. It can be based on some sort of bigotry, um, and just the question is shouldn't be is it discrimination, but maybe something like is it justifiable discrimination?
Yeah.
And even if it is unjustifiable discrimination, I still don't think that that should be that should be a matter of law. Maybe you should morally condemn it if it's discrimination based on bigotry, but I don't see why it's so bad that it's justifiable to use the violence of the state to solve this supposed problem.
Also, the way I see it from this article, and again, I haven't been inside of Al Azhar school, so I don't know if this article is entirely accurate or maybe, or at the very least, complete in information. But if they divide students sometimes by sex during sports lessons, I think that's sometimes justifiable. I mean, putting the girls and the boys to play together football may not actually be the smartest idea. It's just the way it is. I mean, as you said, discrimination is basically acknowledging that there is a difference. And, sometimes acknowledging that difference can actually save a lot of hassle, such as the hassle of physical injuries. Because if a 15-year-old boy goes in a tackling in football against a 15-year-old girl, the 15-year-old girl might need hospitalization, whereas another 15-year-old boy will just shrug it off. It's just the way it is. I know that's triggering, but still.
Yeah, and I mean having PE classes divided by or segregated by sex is, I think, quite normal. I mean, it was certainly like that at the school I went to, at least like starting in I think seventh form, like in
Mhm.
elementary school, and like in fifth and sixth form, you had PE together with the girls, but then after that um, it was just the boys and the girls separately,
Yep.
and
Yep.
I think that makes a lot of sense.
Right. Okay. Oh my God, we're 2 minutes over time. So that's probably enough for tonight. Next week, definitely we're gonna meet again. Hopefully with a shorter news section,
Yep.
so we can get to tackle a lot more points between the news items. And I'm pretty much out of things to say, but I'm sure Jon has a little bit more to say.
Yeah, so please do check out my blog, which is at orthogonalideas.com, and I will see you next week. Goodbye, everyone. Take the red pill.
Take the red pill. Goodbye, everyone.